She got into a mafioso's car by mistake and fell asleep. She woke up with a mysterious engagement ring on her finger. Each like and comment helps heart pulses touch even more hearts. Join us for the next story. The night had been too long for Beatrice, and her fingers still carried the sweet perfume of white roses that she had arranged for endless hours in that luxurious hall downtown. She could barely keep her eyes open while waiting outside the building, her entire body aching from the effort of transforming that cold space into something that resembled an enchanted garden for the wedding of people she would never know. The black car that stopped in front of her looked identical to the taxi she had called through the app, and she was too exhausted to notice that there was no transportation company identification on that impeccable vehicle. She entered without hesitation, sinking into the soft leather seat that smelled of something expensive and masculine, hugging her worn coat against her body and closing her eyes even before managing to murmur the address of her small apartment. "I just need to close my eyes for a second, driver. You can head to the right address," she said, without looking at the driver, feeling fatigue pulling her into a deep and inevitable sleep. Ricardo de Rosa had spent the entire night resolving business that ordinary men would prefer not to know about, and when he finally left that discreet restaurant where deals were sealed with handshakes worth more than contracts, all he wanted was the silence of his car and the solitude he had chosen as a companion for so long. But upon opening the vehicle door, his eyes found something completely unexpected. A woman sleeping deeply in his back seat, her brown hair spread like silk over the dark leather, her face serene like someone who had no idea of the danger that being there represented. His first instinct was to wake her, perhaps with the coldness he used to deal with intruders, but something in the vulnerability of that scene made him hesitate, as if he were facing something too fragile for his hands marked by difficult choices. The driver, who had returned from the restaurant bathroom, stopped beside the open door awaiting orders, but Ricardo merely raised his hand in silence, his eyes still fixed on that sleeping figure. "Sir, what do we do with her?" the man whispered, and Ricardo answered without averting his gaze. "She looks tired. We take her home. She chose to enter my world. Now she will get to know it," he said, without confessing that something about that woman intrigued him, making him feel that he should take care of her, so fragile and serene while sleeping. Ricardo entered the car with calculated movements, sitting beside her without making a sound, and for the first time in years, he allowed himself to simply observe someone without ulterior motives or elaborate plans. There was something disturbingly pure in her sleeping expression, as if the cruel world he knew so well had never touched that soul, and this awakened in him a need for protection that he had buried along with parts of himself he preferred to forget. During the silent journey through the empty streets of dawn, she murmured something incomprehensible about petals and colors, turning uncomfortably on the seat, and it was then that he noticed how she trembled slightly, even while hugging her own coat that was too thin for the cold night. Without thinking, he took off his Italian overcoat and covered her with infinite care, his fingers accidentally brushing against the strands of hair that fell over her face, and the touch was like electricity coursing through his skin. "She smells of flowers and innocence," he thought. "Two things that don't exist in my world but now sleep beside me." The path to his mansion on the outskirts of the city had never seemed so short, and Ricardo found himself wishing it would last longer, just to have more time observing that sleeping mystery that had invaded his most private space. When they finally arrived at the imposing gates of his property, she was still sleeping deeply, completely unaware of the fact that she had crossed an invisible line between the common world and a universe where the rules were different, where men like him decided fates with the same ease with which she seemed to arrange flowers. He exited first, signaling for the driver to remain silent, and then did something that surprised even himself. He leaned over her and took her in his arms, feeling the light weight of her body against his chest, her warmth penetrating through his carefully constructed defenses. Beatrice only sighed in her sleep, unconsciously nestling against him, and Ricardo felt something inside him tremble, as if ancient walls were beginning to show cracks. "Who are you, little one? Why couldn't I wake you and remove you from that car? I don't know how to love, only to possess." The corridors of the mansion were plunged into shadows when he carried her inside, his steps echoing on the polished marble as he climbed the stairs to the guest wing that was rarely used. He chose the most beautiful room, the one overlooking the garden his mother had planted years before she left, and placed Beatrice gently on the king-size bed, observing how she immediately curled up between the silk sheets, seeking warmth even in her deep sleep. Ricardo stood there for long minutes, fighting against the irrational impulse to lie beside her and discover what it would be like to wake up with someone after so many years of chosen solitude. But then his eyes fell on the ring in his pocket, the antique jewel that had belonged to his mother, and that he always carried with him without ever understanding exactly why. It was a beautiful engagement ring, with a diamond surrounded by blue sapphires, a unique piece that told a love story he had never fully known. "My mother said I would know when I found the right person. Could it be you? Something tells me yes, that I cannot stay away from you." Without allowing reason to interfere in that moment of inexplicable madness, Ricardo delicately took Beatrice's left hand, admiring how her fingers were delicate compared to his, marked by old calluses from someone who worked with their hands. The ring slid perfectly onto her ring finger, as if it had always belonged there, and something inside him calmed down, as if a lost piece had finally found its place. She didn't wake up, only murmured something that sounded like home, and Ricardo wondered what secrets she carried, what life she lived during the day, while he commanded his empire from the shadows. He covered her with another blanket, adjusted the pillow under her head with care he didn't know he possessed, and then forced himself to leave the room before doing something even more reckless. "Now you're mine, even if you don't know it yet. And I protect what's mine with my life." The night dragged on in insomnia for Ricardo, who spent hours in his office pretending to work while his mind constantly returned to the woman sleeping under his roof, wearing his mother's ring, as if it made any sense in the logical and calculated world he had created. He had quickly investigated who she was. Beatrice Mariani, 24 years old, freelance florist, orphaned since 16, clean of any connection to his world or his enemies, an ordinary person who had simply gotten into the wrong car at the wrong time, or perhaps at exactly the right time. The basic information did not explain the effect she had on him, the way her presence had disturbed the careful balance of his existence in just a few hours. Ricardo poured himself whiskey the third of the night, trying to drown the insistent voice in his mind, saying that everything was about to change. An orphan like me. Perhaps that's why I recognized something familiar in her, the loneliness disguised as strength. The morning sun penetrated through the silk curtains when Beatrice finally began to wake, her eyes slowly opening to an ornate ceiling that definitely did not belong to her small apartment in the city center. The first thing she noticed was the unusual weight on her left hand, and when she raised her fingers to examine, her heart nearly stopped at the sight of the most dazzling ring she had ever seen in her entire life. A diamond surrounded by sapphires that captured the morning light in 1,000 bluish reflections. She tried to pull it, twist it, do anything to remove it, but it was as if the jewel had fused to her skin, refusing to come off no matter how hard she tried, and panic began to rise in her throat like bitter bile. The room around her was too magnificent to be real, with furniture that seemed to be worth more than she would earn in a lifetime, and through the tall windows she could see gardens extending as far as the eye could see. "Where the hell am I? What happened to me last night?" The door opened without warning, and Beatrice instinctively pulled the sheets up to her chin, even though she was fully dressed in the same clothes as the night before. The man who entered was the embodiment of everything she had been taught to fear and desire in equal measure. Tall, with broad shoulders that perfectly filled the impeccable black suit, dark hair combed back, revealing a face with striking features, and eyes the color of espresso that observed her with an intensity that made her skin tingle. He didn't smile, didn't show any emotion beyond calculated interest, as if she were a particularly intriguing puzzle he was determined to solve. Beatrice tried to speak, to demand explanations, to scream even, but when she opened her mouth, all that came out was a hoarse whisper that barely sounded like her own. "Who are you? Why am I here? Why is there a ring on my finger that I can't take off?" Ricardo walked slowly to the window, his hands crossed behind his back, and for a moment just observed the gardens outside before finally answering with a voice that was pure velvet over steel. "My name is Ricardo de Rosa, and you're in my house because you chose to get into my car last night. The ring belonged to my mother, and now it belongs to you, Because the moment you crossed the threshold into my world, you became my responsibility." He turned to face her, and there was something in his eyes that oscillated between possession and protection, as if he himself wasn't sure which feeling dominated. Beatrice tried to get up from the bed, determined to leave regardless of his explanations, but her legs were shaking so much that she had to lean on the nightstand. "I didn't choose anything. I just got into what I thought was a taxi. You can't keep me here, can't I?" Ricardo arched an eyebrow, and there was a trace of dark amusement in his expression that made Beatrice's stomach turn. "My enemies saw you with me last night, little flower. The moment you were seen entering my car, wearing my overcoat, being carried into my house, you became a target. If I let you go now, you wouldn't last 24 hours out there." The casual way he talked about her possible death made Beatrice's blood freeze in her veins, but there was something about the way he called her little flower that sent a different kind of shiver down her spine. She wanted to argue, wanted to scream that none of this was fair, that she had a life, a small but her own business, customers waiting for flower arrangements that would never be delivered. But when she looked into his eyes again, she saw something that made her hesitate. Genuine concern, hidden under layers of control and coldness. "For how long? How long until it's safe for me to leave?" Ricardo moved closer to her, and Beatrice had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact, his expensive, masculine cologne invading her senses in a way that shouldn't be allowed. "Until my enemies understand that you are not a weakness they can exploit. Until I am certain that you can return to your life without carrying a death sentence." He raised his hand as if to touch her face, but stopped inches away, his fingers hovering in the air between them as if an invisible barrier prevented him from completing the gesture. Beatrice felt her heart race, not from fear, but from something much more dangerous, something that made her body lean unconsciously toward him. "And if I'm never safe, if your enemies never forget me, then you stay," Ricardo replied simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world, as if her fate had been sealed the moment their paths crossed. "You stay, and I ensure that nothing and no one will ever hurt you. That's the only promise I can make with absolute certainty." There was an intensity in his words that suggested much more than protection, an unspoken promise that hung in the air between them like electricity before a storm. Beatrice wanted to protest, wanted to say she had a life of her own, that she couldn't simply disappear into his world, but when she opened her mouth, what came out was completely different. "Why the ring? Why did you put your mother's ring on me?" For the first time since entering the room, Ricardo seemed genuinely uncomfortable, his eyes shifting to the ring that shone on her finger, as if he himself didn't fully understand his own actions. "Because when I saw you sleeping in my car, when I carried you into my house, when I placed you in that bed, I knew you weren't just another person passing through my life. My mother always said that ring would find its way to the right person, and last night, looking at you, I simply knew." The words came out of him like a confession torn by force, and Beatrice could see how much it cost a man like him to admit something so irrational, so emotional. "But you don't know me. I don't know you. This is madness, Ricardo." "It is madness," he agreed, moving away from her again, the mask of control sliding back onto his face like familiar armor. "But sometimes madness is all we have left when logic fails to explain what we feel." He walked to the door, pausing before leaving to look at her over his shoulder, and there was something in his eyes that looked very much like loneliness, very much like need, very much like all the things men like him shouldn't feel. "Get dressed. There are clothes in the closet that should fit you. Breakfast will be served in 30 minutes on the terrace. Don't make me come find you." And then he was gone, leaving Beatrice alone with 1,000 questions and a ring that seemed to burn on her finger. The days that followed established a strange and intimate routine between them, a careful dance where they circled around each other without ever really touching, like planets trapped in the same orbit, but doomed never to collide. Ricardo maintained his physical distance, but Beatrice began to notice the small ways he showed care. Rare botanical books appeared in the library, always the ones she had casually mentioned wanting to read. Fresh flowers were changed daily in her room, always her favorites even though she had never said which they were. Meals always included dishes she had loved since childhood, foods that made her wonder how much he had discovered about her. It was disconcerting and comforting in equal measure, to be known so completely by someone who kept his own secrets locked behind dark eyes and calculated silences. "How do you know I like lemon risotto?" she asked one night during dinner, and he merely shrugged. "I make it a point to know everything about the people under my roof." One night, about a week after her arrival, Beatrice was awakened by strange noises coming from the garden, sounds that didn't belong to the usual tranquility of the property. Fear rose in her throat like bile, memories of Ricardo's words about enemies and danger flooding her mind as she got out of bed, her bare feet silent on the cold marble floor. The corridor was plunged in darkness. Only the moonlight filtered through high windows, creating dancing shadows on the walls, and she pressed herself against the wall, her heart beating so loudly she was certain anyone could hear it. Suddenly a figure emerged from the shadows in front of her, and she almost screamed before recognizing Ricardo's familiar silhouette, his body tense like a predator ready to attack. "What are you doing outside your room?" he whispered, his voice low and urgent. Before she could answer, he pulled her to him, his large warm hands on her shoulders, turning her so her back was pressed against his chest as he moved her into a hidden alcove. Beatrice could feel the heat of his body through the thin fabric of her nightgown, could feel his heart beating steady and calm against her back, while hers raced like a caged bird's. "Stay quiet," he murmured in her ear, his warm breath making her skin tingle, and then she heard it. Footsteps on the floor below, low voices that didn't belong to the house staff. Ricardo's body tensed even more around her, a living shield between her and any approaching danger, and Beatrice found herself pressing closer to him, seeking not just protection but something more, something that had no name but pulsed between them like a living thing. "Nothing will hurt you while I'm here," he whispered, and there was a deadly promise in his voice. "I would kill anyone who tried." The minutes dragged like hours as they remained there, trapped in that forced proximity that was torture and paradise in equal measure, until finally the sounds ceased and the house returned to silence. Ricardo didn't release her immediately, his arms still around her as if reluctant to let her go, and Beatrice allowed herself a moment of weakness, leaning against him, breathing in his scent, memorizing the feeling of being in his arms. "It's safe now," he finally said, but made no move to pull away, and she could swear she felt his lips brush lightly against her hair before he stepped back. He escorted her back to her room, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back, guiding her through the darkness with the familiarity of someone who knew every inch of that place. "What were those noises? Those people?" "Nothing you need to worry about," Ricardo answered, but there was tension in his voice that suggested otherwise. "Just some associates who forgot they're not welcome without an invitation." He stopped at the door to her room, and for a moment too long they just looked at each other, the tension between them thick enough to cut with a knife. Beatrice wanted to ask why he protected her with such ferocity, why his eyes sometimes looked at her as if she were simultaneously his salvation and his damnation, why he put so much distance between them during the day, only to hold her like something precious when danger approached. But the words died in her throat when he raised his hand, his fingers tracing the contour of her face without actually touching her, the ghost of a caress that was somehow more intimate than any real touch. "Sleep well, little flower. I'll be watching." After he left, Beatrice stayed awake looking at the ceiling, her body still vibrating with the memory of his warmth, her mind filled with unanswered questions about the enigmatic man who kept her prisoner and protected in equal measure. She got up and went to the window, looking at the moonlit gardens, and that's when she saw him, Ricardo standing in the middle of the garden, looking at her window like a solitary sentinel guarding something too precious to lose. There was something tragically beautiful about his figure there, alone in the darkness, protecting her from dangers she couldn't even imagine. And Beatrice felt something change inside her, something that recognized the truth they were both trying to deny. She saw him from the window, standing in the garden at midnight, waiting for something that would never come, or someone who was already closer than he dared to admit. A month had passed since Beatrice woke up in that mansion with a diamond ring on her finger, and the routine established between her and Ricardo had become an exquisite torture of proximity and distance, of glances that said everything and silences that hid even more. Leonardo Ferraro had begun to appear with increasing frequency for business meetings, and from the first moment his light blue eyes landed on Beatrice, he made a point of winning her attention with Italian charm and stories that made her laugh in a way she hadn't done in a long time. He was younger than Ricardo, perhaps 30, with an easy smile that contrasted drastically with her host's perpetual seriousness, and Beatrice found herself appreciating his company simply because he treated her like a normal person, not as something fragile that needed protection. During these encounters, Ricardo remained in deadly silence, his dark eyes following Leonardo's every movement like a predator assessing a threat, his fingers drumming on the table in a rhythm that Beatrice had learned to recognize as a sign of imminent danger. Leonardo reminds me that there's a world out there where I could be just Beatrice, not the woman with the mysterious ring. The dinner that night had been planned to discuss a business expansion to the south of France, but from the moment Leonardo arrived, bringing a bouquet of sunflowers for Beatrice, because a florist deserves to receive flowers too, the tension in the dining room could be cut with a knife. Ricardo had received the gesture with an icy silence that made the temperature seem to drop several degrees, his eyes fixed on Beatrice's flushed face as she thanked for the gift with genuine pleasure, something he had never done in all the weeks she had been there. The conversation during dinner flowed mainly between Leonardo and Beatrice, him telling funny stories about his travels, asking about her work with flowers, treating her as if she were an equal guest at the table, not a golden prisoner in a cage of protection. Each laugh he drew from her was like a knife being slowly twisted in Ricardo's chest, who cut his food with surgical precision while fighting violent impulses he hadn't felt since adolescence. Why does her laughter with another man make me want to destroy everything around me? It was when Leonardo touched Beatrice's arm while laughing at something she had said about a disaster with wedding arrangements, his fingers remaining a second too long on her skin, that something finally broke inside Ricardo. The noise of his chair being pushed back echoed through the room like a gunshot, making everyone present freeze in place, the laughter instantly dying on Beatrice's lips as she observed the storm in his eyes. Without saying a word, Ricardo walked to the French doors leading to the terrace, his rigid posture radiating barely contained fury that made even Leonardo, normally so confident, retreat slightly in his chair. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the sound of Ricardo's footsteps disappearing into the night, and Beatrice felt her heart tighten with something she couldn't name, something that made her stand up before she even decided to do so. "Excuse me," she murmured, ignoring Leonardo's concerned look as she followed Ricardo into the darkness of the terrace. She found him in the farthest corner of the terrace, his hands gripping the marble balustrade with such force that his knuckles had turned white, his entire body vibrating with a contained energy that seemed about to explode at any moment. The full moon bathed everything in liquid silver, transforming him into a statue of light and shadow, beautiful and terrifying in equal measure, and Beatrice had to gather all her courage to approach him. The scent of night jasmine floated in the air between them, mixing with his smell that she had learned to recognize even with her eyes closed, and for a moment she just stood there, observing the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw was so tight that she could see the muscle jumping under his skin. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft as silk but carried a determination that surprised her. "Why the ring, Ricardo? Why do you really keep me here? Don't come to me with stories about protection and enemies. I want the truth." Ricardo turned slowly to face her, and what she saw in his eyes made her lose her breath completely. It was raw emotion, unfiltered, the kind that men like him spent their entire lives learning to hide. And there it was, exposed only for her to see, vulnerable and fierce at the same time. His hands still trembled slightly when he moved them away from the balustrade, and Beatrice could see the effort it cost him not to reach for her, not to pull her to him and end the distance he had so carefully maintained between them. The moon created shadows on his face that accentuated every angle, every line of tension, and when he finally spoke, his voice was hoarse with repressed emotion. "Because from the moment you entered that car, from the instant I saw you sleeping there as if you belonged in my world, even without knowing it existed, I knew I couldn't let you go. You ask me why the ring? Because I needed something, anything, that would guarantee me that you wouldn't disappear like a dream when the sun rose." Beatrice took a step toward him, her heart beating so hard that she was sure he could hear it, and there was something electric in the air between them, like the atmosphere before a summer storm. She could see the battle happening behind those dark eyes, desire fighting against control, need against reason, and something inside her delighted in knowing that she had this power over him, that beneath all that calculated coldness was a man who desired her with an intensity that frightened him. Her hands trembled slightly when she raised them, stopping inches from his chest, feeling the heat radiating through the thin fabric of his shirt, but not actually touching him, maintaining that final barrier between them. You keep me prisoner but can barely look at me during the day. You protect me from everyone except yourself. You gave me a ring that was your mother's, but act as if my touch were poison. What do you want from me, Ricardo? Everything. The word escaped him like a confession extracted under torture. And before Beatrice could process what was happening, his control finally shattered like glass. His hands found her waist, pulling her against his body with an urgency that stole the air from her lungs, while his other hand rose to hold her face with a tenderness that contrasted with the intensity of the moment. For an eternal instant, they just looked at each other, breathing the same air, lips inches apart, and Beatrice could see in him years of solitude, of repressed desire, of needs denied in the name of control. And then he kissed her, and it was as if the whole world exploded in colors she never knew existed. "Then don't," she had whispered against his lips moments before, and those two words were his undoing. The kiss was everything that the polite and contained kisses she had experienced before were not. It was liquid fire, desperation and hunger, as if he were trying to memorize her taste, as if he knew it might be the only time. His hand on her face held her as if she were made of precious crystal, but his mouth on hers was pure possession, claiming something he had no right to claim, but that she found herself desperately willing to give. Beatrice melted against him, her hands finally finding his chest, feeling the racing heart beneath her palms that mirrored the frantic rhythm of her own, and for a perfect moment there was nothing else besides the two of them, besides this kiss that seemed to rewrite the laws of the universe. When he deepened the kiss, his tongue tracing the curve of her lips in a silent request that she answered without hesitation, Beatrice felt her knees weaken, and only his arms around her kept her standing. "I've waited a lifetime for this," he murmured against her lips, "and didn't even know I was waiting." When they finally separated, both were breathless, their chests rising and falling at an accelerated pace, and Ricardo pressed his forehead against hers, his eyes closed as if he were in agony. Beatrice could feel the tremor running through his body, the battle between pulling her in for another kiss and pushing her away forever, and she kept her hands on his chest, feeling every irregular breath, every heartbeat that screamed a truth that neither of them was ready to admit out loud. The world around them had completely disappeared. There was no longer Leonardo waiting in the dining room, no enemies lurking in the shadows. There were only the two of them, and this stolen moment under a starlit sky that seemed to bless their madness. For long seconds they remained like this, breathing each other in, memorizing the feeling of being so close, and Beatrice desperately wanted time to stop right there, in that perfect instant before reality inevitably intruded. "You don't understand the danger you're in by staying with me," Ricardo finally whispered, his voice broken in a way that broke her heart. And then, as if the words themselves had broken the spell, he moved away from her, each inch of distance seeming like an insurmountable abyss opening between them. Beatrice instinctively reached out, wanting to pull him back, wanting to say that she didn't care about the danger, that she would rather risk everything than live without that feeling of being truly alive that only he awakened in her. But Ricardo was already backing away, the mask of control sliding back onto his face, even as his eyes still burned with the fire of what they had shared, and she could see the exact moment when he made a decision that would change everything. Without saying anything more, he turned and walked back to the house, leaving her alone on the terrace with his taste still on her lips and her heart in pieces on the marble floor. "Don't leave me," she whispered to the night, but he had already disappeared into the shadows of the mansion. 3 days had passed since the kiss on the terrace, 3 days during which Ricardo had simply disappeared, leaving the mansion shrouded in a silence that weighed on Beatrice like a shroud. The staff continued their routines with silent efficiency, but she could see in their furtive glances that something was wrong, that the sudden absence of their employer was as unusual as it was disturbing for everyone. Beatrice wandered through the empty rooms like a ghost, the ring on her finger seeming to weigh a ton, each space reminding her of shared moments that now seemed to belong to another life, another time when the impossible seemed possible. On the morning of the third day, she awoke with the sun coming through her windows and something different in the air, a finality that made her stomach tighten even before she saw the envelope on her bedside table. He didn't have the courage to say goodbye in person, she thought bitterly, as she opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a first-class airline ticket to Paris, departure scheduled for that same afternoon, one way only, and Beatrice felt the world spinning around her as the reality of what was happening hit her like a punch to the stomach. Along with the ticket was an unlimited credit card in her name and a brief note with Ricardo's strong handwriting. Your freedom, as has always been your right. Go to Paris for a while until they forget you were under my protection, and be free as you would like. Nothing more, no explanation, no farewell, just the coldness of a decision made and executed with the same efficiency with which he conducted his business. When she opened the closet, she found a Louis Vuitton suitcase already prepared, full of new and expensive clothes he had bought for her during her stay, each piece chosen with a care that now seemed cruel in its consideration. The driver was already waiting downstairs. One of the maids informed her with eyes full of pity, the car ready to take her to the airport as soon as she was ready. He's sending me away, as if I were a business problem that needed to be solved. Beatrice descended the stairs slowly, each step echoing like a final sentence in the grand entrance hall, the suitcase weighing in her hand as if she were carrying not just clothes, but all the unrealized dreams she had begun to weave in that month. She stopped in the middle of the hall, looking around one last time, memorizing every detail of the place that, despite everything, had begun to feel like home, the place where she had discovered that her heart was capable of feeling things she thought impossible. It was then that she saw him, and the air fled from her lungs in a broken sigh that echoed through the empty space. Ricardo was standing at the top of the staircase, impeccably dressed as always in a dark suit, but there was something defeated in his posture, something broken in the way his shoulders curved slightly, as if he carried the weight of the world. "Don't say anything," she silently begged, "because if you ask, I'll stay, and we both know that would destroy us." Their eyes met across the distance, and in that eternal moment, 1,000 unspoken conversations passed between them, 1,000 possible futures that would never come to be, 1,000 mornings they would never share. Beatrice could see the battle happening in those dark eyes she had learned to read like an open book, the desire to come down those stairs and stop her fighting against the certainty that letting her go was the only way to keep her safe. She waited, her heart screaming for him to say something, anything, just one word to show that this was destroying him as much as it was destroying her, but Ricardo remained silent, his lips sealed like a locked safe. The driver cleared his throat uncomfortably behind her, reminding her that time was passing, that the plane wouldn't wait, that life goes on even when hearts break into pieces impossible to put back together. "Say something," she wanted to scream. "Give me a reason to stay." But the words died in her throat when she saw a single tear roll down his face. With her heart breaking with each step, Beatrice turned and walked to the car, each movement feeling as if she were walking through molasses, as if the universe itself was trying to prevent her from leaving. She didn't look back as she entered the vehicle, not trusting herself to maintain her decision. If she saw again the man who had turned her world upside down in a matter of weeks. The car began to move, the gravel crunching under the tires like breaking bones, and it was only when the gates of the mansion closed behind her that Beatrice finally allowed the tears to fall, silent and unstoppable, like summer rain. Throughout the journey to the airport, she twisted the ring on her finger, trying once more to remove it, but it was as if the jewel had taken root, refusing to let her forget, refusing to release her completely. "Even in sending me away, you ensure that a part of me will always belong to you." At the airport, while waiting in the first-class lounge, Beatrice opened her suitcase looking for her documents and found something she hadn't noticed before, a thick envelope hidden among her clothes. With trembling hands, she opened it and almost sobbed at what was inside. It was a photo of her sleeping in his car that first night, her face serene and unaware of the man watching her with an expression of admiration that took her breath away. But it was what was written on the back, in Ricardo's strong yet trembling handwriting, that finally broke her defenses completely. You were always free to leave. I am the one who became a prisoner the moment you entered my life. Forgive me for not being strong enough to be the man you deserve, for not being able to choose you over my world. You deserve flowers and sunlight, not the shadows I carry, he said. The flight was announced, and Beatrice rose mechanically, her movements automatic while her mind was still trapped in that mansion, on that terrace, in that kiss that had rewritten her understanding of what it was possible to feel for another human being. She handed over her ticket, walked down the corridor leading to the plane, each step taking her further from the only place where she had felt truly alive. When she sat in her first-class seat, the luxury around her seeming to mock her broken heart, she closed her eyes and let the memories flood her, his smell, the warmth of his arms around her, the way he murmured, "Little flower," as if it were a prayer. The plane began to taxi, and Beatrice pressed her forehead against the window, watching the city disappear below, taking with it a piece of her soul that she knew she would never recover. I'm leaving, but a part of me will always be in that mansion, waiting for you in the shadows. Meanwhile, from the terrace of his mansion, Ricardo watched the plane rise in the sky, his eyes following the silver dot until it disappeared into the clouds, taking with it the only light that had entered his life in years. He had spent 3 days convincing himself that he was doing the right thing, that keeping her would mean condemning her to a life of constant danger, of looking over her shoulder, of becoming a target for anyone who wanted to hurt him. But now, seeing her leave, feeling the emptiness her absence left, he wondered if safety was worth the price of happiness, if a long and empty life was preferable to a short and full one. His right-hand man, Niccolo, approached silently, the grave expression of someone bringing bad news, and Ricardo didn't even need to look to know that something was terribly wrong. "Sir," Niccolo began, his voice tense with barely contained urgency, "we have a problem. The Cavalettis found out about the girl. We intercepted communications. They know she's heading to Paris. What did you say?" Ricardo turned around, and for the first time in years, genuine fear crossed his face. "They have men waiting at Charles de Gaulle Airport," Niccolo continued, his eyes avoiding his boss's, knowing he was delivering a death sentence. "They plan to grab her as soon as she lands, use her as leverage against you. It seems your attempt to protect her by keeping her here has only marked her as your weakness. Sir, if we don't act now—" But Ricardo was already moving, his mind calculating routes, timing, probabilities. All the deadly coldness that had made him feared in that world now focused on a single objective, to reach her before it was too late. He grabbed the phone, dialing the number he had memorized but sworn never to use, the number of the cell phone he had placed in her bag without her knowledge. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times, each ring like a nail being hammered into his coffin, until finally, miraculously, she answered. "Beatrice," he said, and his voice, always so controlled, was broken with desperation. "Leave the hotel as soon as you land. Don't take a taxi. Don't talk to anyone. Leave the hotel. Now." After receiving Ricardo's call, Beatrice thought he was overreacting, as no one approached her room for quite some time. She was almost thinking he had just found an excuse to call and hear her voice when she heard the first noises in the hallway. They were heavy footsteps, multiple, approaching with a determination that made her blood freeze, and she grabbed her bag with trembling hands, her heart racing while desperately searching for an exit that didn't exist in that third-floor hotel room. The doorknob began to turn, first slowly, testing, and then with increasing force when it met resistance, and Beatrice backed up to the opposite wall, the phone still in her hand where Ricardo's voice shouted her name. That's when everything happened at once. The door was kicked in with a crash that shook the walls. 3 enormous men entered the room, and before any of them could take another step, a familiar figure appeared behind them like death itself personified. "Ricardo," she whispered, and it was as if his name was a prayer answered. He looked different from anything she had ever seen. The man, always so controlled and impeccable, now completely undone, his suit wrinkled, his hair disheveled as if he had run his fingers through it 1,000 times, and his eyes burned with a ferocity that was both terrifying and magnificent. The men who had invaded her room didn't stand a chance. Ricardo took them down with a brutal efficiency that spoke of years of training that Beatrice preferred not to imagine, his movements precise and lethal even while his eyes never left her face, as if he needed the sight of her to keep breathing. In a matter of seconds, the three intruders were on the floor, unconscious or unable to move, and then Ricardo was crossing the room in 2 wide strides, pulling her into his arms with a desperation that completely stole her breath. His hands moved over her face, her arms looking for injuries that didn't exist, and Beatrice could feel the tremor that ran through his body, the adrenaline and fear mixed in a combination that made him seem almost vulnerable. "Are you okay? Did they hurt you? Beatrice, tell me you're okay." "I'm fine," she managed to whisper against his chest, where he had pulled her in an embrace that seemed to want to fuse her to his body, and she could feel his heart beating as fast as her own, could feel each irregular breath he took as if he had run through hell to reach her. And perhaps he had. Ricardo buried his face in her hair, breathing deeply as if her scent was the only thing keeping him sane, and when he spoke, his voice was broken in a way that shattered her heart into 1,000 impossible-to-count pieces. "I tried to stay away, tried to do the right thing, tried to protect you by keeping my distance, but I would rather watch the world burn than have you away from me. Forgive me, Beatrice. Forgive me for almost losing you because of my stupid pride." She raised her face to look into his eyes, and what she saw there, raw love, desperation, need, made her own tears finally fall. "There is nothing to forgive. Just take me home." They fled the hotel through the back, Ricardo keeping her protected with his body as they navigated the narrow streets of Paris, his eyes constantly checking shadows and potential threats with the paranoia of someone who had learned in the worst way that danger was always lurking. He had brought men with him, Beatrice realized, discreet figures who appeared and disappeared around corners, clearing the path ahead like invisible guardians, and she wondered how many resources he had mobilized to reach her in time. Every few blocks he pulled her into an alley or doorway, checking if they were being followed, and during these moments of forced proximity, Beatrice could feel the tension vibrating through him like electricity, the iron control he maintained over himself, to not simply press her against the wall and kiss her until they both forgot where they were. It was during one of these stops, hidden in an old bookstore while waiting for a car, that she finally touched his face with gentle fingers, tracing the tense line of his jaw. "You came for me. You crossed the world to save me when you could have let me go." "Let you go?" Ricardo captured her hand, pressing it against his face as if her touch was the only real thing in a world of shadows, and his dark eyes shone with an intensity that made her stomach flip in the best possible way. "Beatrice, you don't understand. Letting you go would be like ripping my own heart from my chest and still expecting it to beat. I tried. God knows I tried to convince myself that you would be better without me, safer away from my world. But when Niccolo told me the Cavaletti knew about you..." He stopped, swallowing hard, and she could see the retrospective terror in his eyes, the knowledge of how close he had come to losing her forever. "I would have burned all of Paris to find you, would have destroyed anyone who stood between us. I still would." The conviction in his voice should frighten her, Beatrice knew, but instead it only made her feel preciously protected. "Never send me away again, Ricardo. Promise me." They found a moment of calm in a small cafe hidden on a side street, waiting while Ricardo's men secured safe transport to the private airport where his jet waited to take them back to Italy. Beatrice observed the man sitting across from her, noticing the small changes the last hours had caused. The way he kept her hand in his on the table, as if he couldn't bear not touching her. The way his eyes checked on her every few seconds, making sure she was still there. The way his entire body was positioned between her and the door, a living shield against any danger. It was touching and heartbreaking in equal measure to see this powerful man reduced to such raw need, and Beatrice squeezed his hand, calling his attention back to her. "Never again," he promised, raising her hand to press a kiss to the palm that sent shivers throughout her body. "Never again will I be strong enough to push you away, even if I should. I'm a selfish man, Beatrice, and you are the only luxury I cannot afford to lose." The flight back to Italy was quiet, but it was a comfortable silence, filled with soft touches and looks that said everything words couldn't yet fully express. Ricardo kept her at his side on the luxurious cabin sofa, his arm around her, as if he still didn't quite believe she was safe, that she was there, that she had chosen to return with him, despite everything. Beatrice could see the wheels turning in his mind, plans being made, strategies being formulated, and she knew without asking that the Cavaletti would pay dearly for having dared to threaten her, that Ricardo would move heaven and earth to ensure no one would ever use her against him again. But this no longer frightened her. She had seen the man behind the power, had touched the heart he so fiercely protected, and knew that everything he did out of love, even if it was a love stained by the shadows of his world. "You're thinking about how to destroy them, aren't you?" she asked softly, and he didn't deny it, only pulled her closer. When they arrived back at the mansion, something fundamental had changed between them, an invisible barrier that had been completely demolished by the near tragedy they had faced. In the days that followed, Ricardo dealt with the Cavaletti threat with ruthless efficiency, completely neutralizing them through means Beatrice preferred not to know in detail, consolidating his power in a way that made it clear to everyone in his world that she was under his absolute protection. But when he returned home at night, he was just Ricardo, the man who held her as if she were made of moonlight and might vanish at any moment, who murmured words of love in Italian against her skin when he thought she was sleeping. Beatrice, for her part, didn't try to change him or take him out of that world. She had accepted who he was completely, the man who commanded empires in the shadows, but trembled when she touched his face, who could be ruthless with his enemies, but infinitely gentle with her. "I don't need you to be different," she told him one night, lying in his arms. "I need you to be mine as I am yours." 3 months after that terrible night in Paris, on a clear Italian summer night, Ricardo took Beatrice to the same terrace where they had shared their first kiss, where everything had begun and almost ended so many times. The stars shone like diamonds in the dark sky, and the air was perfumed with the night jasmine she had planted in the garden, gradually transforming his cold fortress into something that felt more like a home. He was nervous. She could tell by the way his fingers drummed against his thigh, a habit he only displayed when something really mattered, and Beatrice had to hide a smile when she realized what was about to happen. Ricardo turned to her, taking her hands in his, and for the first time since they had met, she saw him completely vulnerable, without masks, without walls, just the man who loved her more than life itself. "Beatrice," he began, and then, completely surprising her, he knelt before her. With surprisingly gentle hands for someone so lethal, Ricardo carefully removed his mother's antique ring from Beatrice's finger, the same ring he had placed on her that first night, when he didn't even know what he was doing, just following an instinct that had proven wiser than any logic. In its place, he presented another ring, new but no less impressive, a diamond solitaire surrounded by emeralds that captured the exact color of her eyes when she laughed, and Beatrice realized with a tight heart that he must have searched long to find stones of that specific color. "This one," he said with a voice hoarse with emotion, "you can take off whenever you want. It's your choice, it always has been, always will be. But I pray that you choose to keep it, choose to keep me, because Beatrice Mariani, you are my heart beating outside my chest, and I no longer know how to exist without you." Tears were flowing freely down her face now as she looked at the man kneeling before her, offering not just a ring, but his entire soul. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, 1,000 times yes, and no, I will never want to take it off." The wedding took place a month later at the mansion, an intimate ceremony with only the closest and most trusted present, but what it lacked in size, it made up for in pure emotion. Beatrice descended the same stairs where she had once left with a broken heart, but now walked toward the man who had gone through hell to bring her back, and the look on Ricardo's face when he saw her in her wedding dress, pure wonder mixed with devotion, was worth every moment of pain they had faced to get there. They exchanged vows in the garden his mother had planted, under an arch of white flowers that Beatrice had arranged herself, and when Ricardo promised to love and protect her with his life, everyone there knew he would literally give his life for her without hesitation. And when he kissed her, it was with the same intensity as that first kiss on the terrace, but now tempered with certainty, with permanence, with the promise of all the tomorrows they would have together. "You are mine forever now," he murmured against her lips, and she smiled. "I always have been since that first night." Their life found a rhythm in the months that followed, a harmony between light and shadow that shouldn't work but worked perfectly. Beatrice reopened her flower shop, now with clients that included the most powerful and exclusive families in Italy, all eager to gain the favor of Riccardo de Rosa's wife, although she insisted on keeping her small studio in the city center where everything had begun. Riccardo continued commanding his empire, but now there was a softness at the edges of his authority, a reason to come home every night that made him refuse meetings that would run late, delegate more responsibilities to spend mornings in bed with his wife. They were a study in contrasts, she all light and laughter and flowers, he all shadows and silences and power. But together, they created something unique, something that defied all expectations. "How did a florist end up married to a man like me?" he sometimes asked, and she always answered the same way: destiny, or perhaps just the wrong car at the right time. One night, 6 months after the wedding, they were lying together in their bed, bodies intertwined beneath the silk sheets, moonlight creating patterns through the curtains as Beatrice played with her wedding ring, spinning it on her finger in a habit she had developed when thoughtful. Riccardo's mother's antique ring now rested on a chain around her neck, close to her heart, where he had placed it on their wedding night, saying he wanted her to carry both, the past and the future, the history and the promise. She turned to look at him, finding him already watching her with that intensity that still made her stomach do somersaults, and couldn't resist teasing him with the thought that had struck her earlier that day while arranging roses for an event. "I still can't believe I got into the wrong car that night. Imagine if I had actually taken the right taxi. None of this would have happened. We would never have met." She felt his arms tighten around her instantly. Riccardo rolled on top of her, propping himself up on his elbows to look into her eyes, and there was something fierce and possessive in his expression that sent delicious shivers down her spine, reminding her that beneath the civilized veneer was still the man who had destroyed an entire criminal empire to keep her safe. "It wasn't the wrong car," he said with absolute conviction, his voice low and intense like velvet over steel, one of his hands rising to caress her face with infinite reverence. "It was exactly where you were supposed to be, where you should have always been. My car, my home, my bed, my life. The universe was merely correcting a cosmic error that night, bringing you to where you belonged from the beginning." He kissed her then, deep and possessive, a kiss that spoke of ownership and devotion in equal measure. And when they separated, both breathing heavily, he added with a rare smile that completely transformed his face, "Besides, if you had taken that taxi, I would have found you eventually. Some destinies are inevitable, little flower, and you have always been mine." Beatrice pulled him down for another kiss, pouring into it all the love she felt for this complex and contradictory man who had turned her life upside down in the best possible way. And when they finally parted, she intertwined their fingers, looking at how their hands fit perfectly despite the differences, hers small and stained with flower pollen, his large and marked by a life she would never fully know. It was a perfect metaphor for them, she thought, different in every aspect, but somehow creating something beautiful together, something neither of them had imagined possible until that fateful night when she had entered the wrong car that turned out to be exactly the right one. Riccardo brought their intertwined hands to his lips, kissing each of her fingers with devotion that stole her breath, and then pulled her impossibly closer, as if even after everything they had been through, he still couldn't believe she was real, that she was his, that she had chosen to stay. 6 months after the definitive return from Paris, the De Rosa mansion no longer seemed like the cold, imposing fortress that Beatrice had known on that first confusing morning. Small changes had transformed the space into something alive and welcoming. Vases with fresh flowers in every room, wedding photographs strategically positioned where Riccardo pretended not to notice them but always paused to look, and his mother's garden had been expanded with Beatrice's favorite flowers, creating an explosion of colors that could be seen from any window. It was a Sunday afternoon when she found him in his office, not working as would be expected, but simply looking out the window to where she had spent the morning planting tulips. "You've transformed this place," he said without turning around, his voice carrying an admiration that still made her blush. "Transformed me." Beatrice approached him, wrapping her arms around his waist from behind, pressing her face against his broad back and breathing deeply that scent that had become her safe harbor. "We transformed each other," she gently corrected, feeling him relax under her touch as he always did, as if only she had the power to calm the storms that still occasionally raged within him. "I'm not the same person who got into that car 6 months ago either. How could I be after learning what it is to be loved by you?" Ricardo turned in her arms, holding her face between his hands with that mixture of reverence and possessiveness that defined her as his in a way that went beyond rings or papers. "Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night in panic," he confessed, his voice low and vulnerable in a way that only she had the privilege to witness. "Afraid that all of this is a dream, that I'll wake up and discover that you never got into that car, that I'm still alone in this house that's too big, in this life that's too empty." Beatrice rose on her tiptoes to kiss him softly, pouring into the gesture all the certainty and permanence he needed to feel. "Real," she murmured against his lips between gentle kisses. "As real as this ring you put on my finger twice. As real as every morning I wake up beside you. As real as the love I feel growing each day, even when I think it's not possible to love you more than I already do." She could feel his smile against her mouth, that rare and precious smile that completely transformed his face, making him look years younger, almost juvenile in his happiness. That night, as they prepared for bed, Beatrice watched Ricardo perform what had become his nightly ritual, checking all the doors, verifying the security system, ensuring she was safe, even though the Cavaletti threat had been eliminated months ago. It was his way of showing love, this constant vigilance, this need to protect her even from imaginary dangers. When he finally lay down beside her, pulling her into his arms as he did every night, she intertwined their fingers, admiring how their wedding bands softly gleamed in the lamplight. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had woken up that first morning and simply fled, if fear had been greater than curiosity." Ricardo tightened his arms around her, as if the mere thought of her absence could still hurt him. "I would have gone after you," he replied with absolute certainty, "to the ends of the earth, if necessary. You entered my life, Beatrice, and in that moment, even without knowing it sealed our fates. There was no other possible ending besides this, you here in my arms forever." And as sleep reached them, fingers intertwined and hearts beating in sync, Beatrice smiled against his chest, knowing that some mistakes were actually destiny showing the way home. He held her hand, like someone who would never let go again. Now tell me in the comments where you're from and tell me, did you like this story? Then subscribe to the channel, leave your like and check out the next one that's waiting for you here on screen. I'll be waiting for you there.